What do you need to know before Poppy Playtime Chapter 5? Since Poppy Playtime burst onto the scene back in 2021, we've been working hard in the Theory Factory trying to figure out the lore of this game. We've covered everything from teasers to ARGs, even the collaborations with other games. But with Chapter 5 on the horizon, I figured it would be useful to put it all into one place so you loyal theorists don't have to lift a pretty little porcelain finger. Here is Game Theory's updated Poppy Playtime Timeline. Hello Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the show that's your one-stop shop for all things Poppy. And this year is Poppy Playtime's 5th anniversary. That is 5 years of lore that have built up, and let me tell you, Mob Entertainment has been busy hiding this stuff. They've added it to new chapters of the game, in ARGs, in books, in so many teasers, and even inside collaborations with Roblox and Fortnite. It's a lot to keep up with, even for me, and it's literally my job. So if you're someone that's only been playing the games, there might be a ton of integral lore you've missed out on. But not to worry, because just like last year, I've decided to lend you all a helping hand and put together a timeline with everything we've learned so far about this beast of a franchise. As usual, instead of focusing really heavily on the evidence like a normal theory, I'll instead be leaning in more on the story side of things. We'll have these little citations in the bottom corner for where we're getting evidence, and we'll be putting our handy dandy theory traffic light in the top corner to clarify things even more. Green means what I'm saying is supported by facts, yellow means what I'm saying is theory, and red means that I'm making assumptions to make sense of the story, but aren't really supported outside of the narrative. But with that out of the way, loyal theorists, let's hop on our Playtime Express and go on a journey through the history of Playtime Co. First stop, Theoryverse.store, where we're having a sale on all things Poppy in anticipation for Chapter 5. You can get 20% off this hoodie, this shirt, these pants, literally everything Poppy is on sale when you use the code PLAYTIME20. But be quick, the deal is only available until February 23rd. Just use the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. And remember to use code PLAYTIME20. But now, let's ride this train back to where it all began and focus on the girl who started it all, Little Miss Poppy Playtime. Poppy was born on March 7th, 1949. She was the most sweet and adorable little girl, and so, very quickly, she found herself in the loving arms of her new adoptive father, Elliot Ludwig.
Playtime Co. is the product of a great man by the name of Elliot Ludwig, divorced but a family man at heart.
He started the toy company in 1930, though he hadn't actually made a single toy yet. He would tell Poppy stories while he held her, about how his wife left him the same year he started the company, and as a result, he lacked any true inspiration until he met her. The next year, in 1950, he created what would soon be the most famous toy.
Poppy Playtime!
Poppy's as lovable as a real girl, and she talks like one too.
Hi, my name is Poppy. I love you.
This doll was revolutionary. She wasn't just a doll who talked, she was a doll who listened. A doll like this had never existed before. People loved her, but no one loved her more than Poppy herself. She loved all of her father's creations. She was always enamored by his genius, not just in how he managed to make Poppy a household name, but because he was doing something no one else was. She knew the reason these toys were able to talk and listen was because they were truly alive. Her father would tell her about his love for science and embryology, and how he used that in his toy-making process to create Poppy Playtime in the first place. Most children would have been put off when they found out their favorite toy was filled with squishy, bloody stuff, but not Poppy. Although he did warn her not to take it apart and show people, just like the rest of his employees. Even though she loved it, the rest of the world wouldn't understand. He also put a clause in the instructions stating that if Poppy was taken apart by untrained personnel, she would break immediately and no refunds would be given, just in case. As time went on, the Poppy doll became more than just that year's most popular toy. She became an icon. Poppy was the new face of the company. They even built a Poppy Playtime theme park, and the real-life Poppy was getting to enjoy everything that came with being the heir to a successful toy company. To her, the factory was absolutely magical. She loved how she got to see new toys getting made. She loved exploring new parts of the factory. This was just the beginning of a long and happy life for her, and she was excited to go and visit Playtime factories all over the... But she never got to visit those factories. Well, at least not as she currently was.
In the 1960s, an unfortunate family death had pushed Ludwig down to his lowest. But with so much ambition, he rose back up and continued to fulfill his vision for the Playtime Co. toy factory.
Poppy woke up on an operating table, her eyes blurry, but as they came into focus, she saw medical equipment, scientists, and most importantly, her father. But something was different about him. His haircut was the same, he was still wearing the same old stuffy pressed suit, but his face looked older, years older. It felt like she had woken up from a deep sleep. It's impossible for someone to look so different in such a short amount of time, and yet he did. However, he's not the only one that changed. As she looked down at her limbs, she realized that the fleshy legs she used to run around the factory had been replaced with porcelain. Her hair was now an unnatural fiery red, and she was wearing a dress that looked awfully familiar. She had been turned into a doll. And it wasn't just any doll. She was now the Poppy Playtime. Before she could even speak, her father leant over and hugged her, crying, and picked her up in his arms, taking her to their new home that he had built inside the factory. He sat her down and told her everything. It turns out, in 1960, when she had only just turned 11 years old, she met a tragic fate. Her father was devastated, like any father would be. She was his entire world, and within moments, it was all taken away from him. So he decided that he wasn't going to lose his family again. He was going to dedicate the rest of his life to bringing her back. And he was going to use the science of embryology to do it, just like he had used it to make the original Poppy dolls. The trouble was, that plan was going to require time, research, and most importantly, money. So Playtime Co. developed new toys like Bron the Dinosaur and Boxy Boo to continue to bring in money from the next generation of kids. They weren't nearly as successful as Poppy, but beggars can't be choosers. More employees were also brought in on the back end, like Mr. Eddie Ritterman and Mr. Leith Pierre, to support the business side of things so that he could focus on his new initiative, the Young Geniuses program, a program where young people would be brought into Playtime Co. headquarters as an apprenticeship of sorts. He wanted the best and brightest young minds to tackle the universe's most unanswerable questions. And what is more unanswerable than death itself? Her father sounded so proud as he told her stories of him and his new team of whiz kids, how they performed hundreds of experiments, all with the goal of her revival, using lab rats to test their theories about how the poppies that resided in the scent of her new body's hair were somehow the key to all of it. Although there were times he got sad while retelling these stories, usually whenever he remembered a young man by the name of Harley Sawyer. He was incredibly smart, but unfortunately he had a bit of a temper and an utter lack of humility, which led her father to make the difficult decision to let him go. Her father had hoped that this would be a learning moment for him, that he would go on to become a better person the more he experienced the wonders of humanity. Maybe one day he could even return to the factory. But the part that he was most proud of, the part that he got the most excited talking about, was when he got to experiment 1006. Its body was made of a mix of machine parts and organic matter, combining his love of engineering and embryology. But the reason he was so proud was because it worked. Their brain worked exactly as hoped. It was proof that real consciousness could exist in an unnatural body. This was the sign they needed. They knew that their attempts at Poppy's resurrection may truly be possible. So they dubbed experiment 1006 the prototype. It wasn't physically what they wanted, but it was enough so that they could move on to the real deal. Experiment 1007, her. As Poppy would sit with her father listening to these stories, she was happy. Someone loved her enough to go to all this trouble. He even signed a contract with Warren Buck Construction Company in 1972 to expand the factory, including a corridor leading straight to her father's office from their new home so that he could visit whenever she wanted. Although, even still, she couldn't help but feel a little sad. He said he did all this for her, but he always seemed distracted, haunted even. The one that got away, Harley, always bugged him. He wished there was something he could have done to save him, but when he joined the Young Geniuses program, he was too old to have his mind changed. If her father wanted to change the world with bright young minds, he needed to start younger. And one day, when he was looking at Poppy, an idea went off in his head.
That is why it is with enormous pleasure that as the founder of Playtime Co., I announce Playcare, our very own on-site orphanage. But it's not only that. It's a school, a playhouse, a place to belong.
It was a giant underground facility, a place that would take in orphans like he did for Poppy all those years ago, acting as both a home and a school for them, teaching them in the ways they should go. He hired a nice lady named Stella Graber to take care of the majority of Playcare's operations. While Poppy was sad that she couldn't interact with these children, she needed to be kept safe and in good condition. Hearing these formerly broken and abandoned souls laughing did put a smile on her face. But the orphans did see her on occasion, from a distance at least, and they adored her. They draw pictures which her father would bring from his office to their home to show her, and that was more than enough for her. However, as was becoming usual, her father would often have to cut their time together short. Other men at the company would come and try to talk to him, and it didn't sound like they were good conversations. She would ask him about them when they spent time together. Apparently, sales were low. They hadn't really released a major hit since Poppy back in 1950. He would joke how he and his toys were stuck in the past, and with all of his focus being on her and the Playcare, he'd lost touch with his innovative side. But he had a plan. Playtime Co. launched Candy Cat in 1979. It was pretty successful and was definitely less old-fashioned, but it paled in comparison to his next big idea in 1984, Huggy Wuggy. This toy changed everything. He became Playtime Co.'s most popular and best-selling toy so far, even more than Poppy, literally saving the company. Since Huggy was so popular, they immediately launched an incredibly creative follow-up girl version, Kissy Missy, in 1985, who was just Huggy, but pink. Poppy could see that this was the desperately needed success her father was hoping for. He was getting older after all, even inventing the grab pack to help him move around the factory. So this success was not only going to ensure the company's legacy, but it also meant that the factory stayed open, and therefore kept her home safe and sound. Fresh off the hit, Poppy sat and watched as her father's creativity returned to him. Playtime Co. released more toys like the Swapimals, Catbee and PJ Pugapilla, and then there was her father's next big idea, the Smiling Critters. A whole line of stuffed animals, each with their own personalities and matching scents. It was her father's most ambitious line of toys yet. He even launched a Saturday morning cartoon for it, which he and Poppy could watch together. By all accounts, this should have been another huge success for the company, but it wasn't. In fact, these little guys became one of Playtime Co.'s biggest failures yet, all because of one of the plushies. Like all of the toys, he was supposed to emit his own scent, lavender, through an uncolored mist, but instead, the plush emitted a red smoke that definitely did not smell like lavender. Not only was it the wrong scent, but it also caused intense nightmares in the kids who bought it. This became a whole controversy that led to the toy being taken off the market entirely. Her father was furious, often missing his time with her to have meetings about this exact issue. But Poppy was small, able to sneak into the vents near his office, and she would see him in shouting matches with the head of innovation, Leith Pierre. After all, his innovation had caused this mess. Leith was overseeing most of the business at this point. How could he let this happen? But Leith never seemed fazed, like he knew something that Poppy didn't, and that scared her. And she was right to be, because before 1989 was even over, her father passed away. The man who raised her, the man who figured out how to bring her back from the dead, was now gone forever. She'd find newspapers left behind by workers, articles talking about her father's death. But unfortunately, like when she originally passed, time and people march on. She was once again truly alone. Even Playtime Co. had to figure out a way to move on and keep making toys without him. And who did they get to take over? None other than Leith Pierre. Poppy suspected foul play, but she had no proof, and right now she had bigger things to worry about. Because with the Smiling Critters fiasco, Leith had to find the company's next big thing, and fast. And his focus immediately turned to her, the living, breathing clone of a girl that everyone thought was dead. Now he would come and visit her to observe her, but he never treated her like a person. She was just a thing to him. She would hear him muttering to himself, "If I can figure out how Elliot did this and mass produce it, it would make all of us a lot of money." The only problem is, Elliot was dead, and the only people who had helped out with the project were kids from the Young Geniuses program, all of whom Poppy hadn't seen around the factory for a long time. Clearly, they'd all moved on, so she figured she was safe. But Leith wouldn't be deterred so easily. She noticed a new man around the factory, Jared Lockhart, a private investigator, and she'd see him talking to Leith a lot. She'd come to learn that he was tasked with finding these people, and that they'd reached out to one of them who looked promising. And one day, while she was snooping around the facility, she saw Leith sitting down with someone new.
My name is Harley Sawyer. I'm called the doctor.
Her eyes widened. This was the man her father had warned her about, the one who lacked humanity in his research. But maybe it's okay. Maybe her father had succeeded. Maybe all of these years away had helped him.
Giant toys. We can increase our workforce and simultaneously decrease the number of lawsuits and people on our payroll.
After a few weeks, in January of 1990, Harley began to appear in Poppy's home. He was baffled by her existence and would often scoff at the idea that her soft father could ever have accomplished this. Nevertheless, he had, and so the poking and prodding began.
It's been weeks and weeks of taking things out and putting them back in and taking things out and putting them back in over and over and over.
Everything he did was filled with an anger, a bitterness towards her father, like he was trying to outdo him. He was willing to do anything that it took for the advancement of science. Poppy wasn't the only one he was doing this to either. Harley would often talk frustratedly about how she and another experiment were so difficult to work with. 1006, the prototype. Poppy remembered that name from all those years ago when her father told her about her creation. They had since been turned into a jester-like character, so they would somewhat blend in with the old-fashioned toy factory at the time. But now, she knew Harley was also prodding them for answers.
You stick us.
Beat us. Tear at flesh.
I learn something new about you every day.
However, he couldn't just keep pulling them apart. He needed to actually experiment. And when Poppy realized that, she was even more horrified. To experiment, you need test subjects. Test subjects that were like her, children, orphans, all of whom were safely being kept down in the bowels of the Playcare. She was forced to witness their pain, being held in the lab as a reference point for the procedure they were about to do. He picked up where Elliot left off with experiment 1008, 1009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, all total failures. And yet, Harley moved on like it was nothing, but Poppy just sat there, weeping, as one by one she watched an innocent child die, until one day when her weeping was interrupted by an unexpected noise. The phone in her home was ringing. Curious, she picked it up. No one ever used this. On the other end of the line was a young boy. He said his name was Ollie, and he knew about the bad men and what they were doing. Poppy couldn't hold back her tears. She would cry to him on the phone every night about the horrors she'd experienced and witnessed, as Ollie just listened and tried to comfort her best he could. This all went on for over 100 experiments before Harley even was able to manage any result with promise. Experiment 1160, Boxy Boo. This proved that what Harley had pitched was possible, that he could make larger living toys, but Poppy knew they weren't like her. This thing was a monster, animalistic, purely acting on instinct. It wasn't aware or alive like she was. It was almost like they'd been brainwashed, and in doing so, lost their humanity. Nevertheless, Harley and Leith ran with it, building the game station as a place where orphans would be tested on their physical and mental abilities. They even changed the curriculum in the schoolhouse to focus on Playtime Co. history, all to hopefully prepare the kids for their permanent residence as bigger bodies. They immediately started performing more elaborate experiments, like creating bigger body versions of Huggy, Yarnaby, and Catnap. Poppy found Catnap's story the most tragic. In 1989, the prototype had managed to occasionally escape confinement, and just like she'd been doing, it befriended an orphan, Theodore Gramble. But the prototype was not a great influence. Theodore got caught attempting to steal files, and eventually in 1990, 2 grab packs and green hands so that they could plan an escape. Unfortunately, they weren't successful, and Theodore overcharged the green hand, electrocuting himself. Poppy was often surprised that the prototype didn't just leave. Instead, it stayed behind and carried Theodore to staff. They turned him into a bigger body, but that actually saved his life, much like her father had done for her all those years ago. In 1991, Poppy met another new bigger body, Mummy Longlegs. She was a huge hit with the kids at the game station, and so got assigned to work there. In fact, all of these giant toys were assigned to a station. Mummy would help with the game station. Huggy was a security guard. Catnap would help the orphans sleep. And Boxy Boo would help get rid of problems, like the poor IT employee named Rowan Stoll, who had begun to figure out what was going on inside the company and threatened to leak it to the press. Seeing all these kids interact with these monsters, it made Poppy angry. They had no idea who was inside these things, or that they too would soon suffer the same fate. And she wasn't the only one feeling this way. The prototype was getting noticeably more angry about the whole ordeal, but unlike Poppy, the prototype was smart enough and big big enough to do something about it. In June of 1992, it opened up the bay doors and allowed Huggy Wuggy to escape the factory. Finally, freedom for at least one of these tortured souls, Poppy thought. But sadly, they were captured 5 hours later. Although they did manage to kill 5 employees, with 6 more going missing. She wasn't so keen on that part. She wanted freedom, yes, but they shouldn't be killing to do it. They'd be no better than them at that point. However, it was getting harder to argue, while Playtime Co. only seemed to be going deeper and deeper down the experimental rabbit hole. For example, Playtime Co. had a theatre on site where attendees of factory tours could watch performances featuring popular characters and see screenings of films, as well as many other parts of the factory. But in January of 1993, a young boy sadly fell into one of the vats, which Playtime took as an opportunity to try their latest experiment. 1322, Doughy the Dough Man. 3 children combined into one. This was truly torturous to witness. Something had to change, and something did change. Just not in the way Poppy expected. That same year, a normal trip to the Playtime Co. Theatre turned into a mass casualty event. The experiments got out and went on a rampage, killing 66 visitors and 12 of Leith's newly created resource extraction specialist team, who were deployed to help deal with the situation. But this time, it wasn't the prototype's doing.
Don't leave us in suspense! What half-wit, soon-to-be dead man made this mistake? Dr. Harley Sawyer.
Harley Sawyer, one of the biggest names in the company, the orchestrator of all this suffering, was also rebelling. While shocking at first, it did kind of make sense. He was easily irritable, quick to anger, and he was deeply power-hungry. Really, he was completely out of control, refusing to listen to any of the other executives. All he wanted was to figure out what it was that made Poppy and the prototype tick. Maybe the prototype offered him a deal, offered to share some information for favor. Poppy had no way of knowing, but what she did know is the Playtime Co. execs wouldn't stand for this. They weren't as forgiving as her father, but she also knew they needed him. Harley's mind was an asset. He was one of the only people in the entire world that knew how to helm the Bigger Bodies initiative. Sure, there were a lot of other young geniuses working on the project now who were smart and more mild-mannered, but at the end of the day, none of them were Harley. She didn't know what happened next. All she knew is that Harley stopped showing up to the labs. Suddenly, the prototype wanted a meeting with all of the toys after what happened in the theatre incident. The prototype began going on about how things needed to change, that they should be free from the torment Playtime had put them through, and that it had a plan to do it. Poppy couldn't believe her ears. Was she actually going to be allowed to leave this place? Live a normal life? Not be stuck down here and torn apart and locked away like a lab rat? It was too good to be true. The other toys thought so too, and so agreed to unite alongside the prototype. The plan was that one day, while on their specific duties, the prototype would deactivate a bunch of Playtime systems, allowing the toys to roam free and escape. They called it the Hour of Joy, but they needed one last hand before they could execute the plan. Playtime Co. had upped their security since Huggy's escape. Now, to deactivate everything, the prototype needed something called the Omni Hand. Poppy knew about this hand. She'd seen the executives use it throughout the factory. The Warden, Leith Pierre, Eddie Ritterman, and Stella Graber. Eddie and Leith were out of the question. They were all big on the experiments and weren't likely to give up the hand. The Warden was a potential option, but then Poppy piped up. Stella would be perfect. She'd seen Stella around the Playcare, and despite approving of the experiments, she was clearly at the end of her rope. Maybe they could appeal to her love and care for the kids and get her to help them. Prototype agreed, though they also knew Stella wouldn't be enough on her own. Fortunately, Stella had been communicating with other scientists about their displeasure. Scientists like Preston Willard. And so, the prototype began sending VHS tapes as well as a phone to Stella. When she heard what it had to say, she folded and agreed to help, waiting for the prototype signal to use the Omni Hand to deactivate everything, having staff members untie and release the giant toys so that they could all go free. That wasn't exactly how it went though. The Hour of Joy happened on August 8th, 1995 at 11 a.m. On that morning, almost every single employee who decided to show up to work was brutally murdered. Huggy broke from his statuesque form and attacked guests in the lobby. Catnap played with scientists like they were cat toys. Even Kissy attacked her captors, the ones who had untied her in the first place, the ones that thought they were helping the cause. It was a complete and total massacre.
It was awful. So so awful. I didn't want this. Wasn't what I thought we were gonna leave. Leave the factory. Not this.
The prototype had made a secondary plan without Poppy. She didn't realize this would be the result. She wouldn't have agreed to it otherwise. She saw people who she had known her whole life get slaughtered before her own eyes. Some people had absolutely no idea these experiments were even going on. They were completely innocent bystanders. Immediately, she marched to the prototype in a rage. How dare you do this? The prototype stared at her and in its jumble of voices explained that they could never leave the factory again. If they did, they'd just be captured and experimented on by different people. Poppy still couldn't get over this betrayal, but deep down, she knew the prototype was right. At the same time, prototype began disappearing more and more, sneaking away secretively, working on something. Poppy wasn't sure what to make of it, until one day as she was walking around the factory, she heard a voice she'd never expected to hear again.
You know I'm still your best shot at cracking that secret.
What? How? How was he still alive? Why was he still alive? How could the prototype work with him after all he's done? And what were they working on? Toys? Experiments? The orphans had been locked up and kept safe. They'd gathered all the orphans after the Hour of Joy. Had they just picked up right where Playtime Co. left off? Poppy couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had to tell the others. Thankfully, there were others who were willing to listen. They weren't particularly happy with the new arrangements, or with the fact that they were now being encouraged to eat the remains of humans in order to survive. They wanted to be free, and so experiments like Doughy, Kissy, and a bunch of the smiling critters all agreed to team up and defy the prototype, while also protecting those they could. Poppy agreed to join them, but she warned them the only way to stop the prototype was to destroy this entire facility, taking them all with it if it came to that. The toys were naturally nervous, but they knew the prototype needed to be stopped. Some speculated about what happened to Harley. Maybe Leaf decided to turn him into one of his own creations so they could still use him. Maybe he'd managed to get a hold of one of the Omni-Hands from the executives. All things were possible, but for now, they needed to focus on stopping the prototype, and Poppy was going to be the one to do it. At least that's what everyone kept saying, but Poppy was conflicted. She cared deeply about these toys, but she also knew the prototype was right and that they could never, ever be free. She had to destroy everything. But then what about all these toys who looked up to her? Did she really want to kill all of these innocent children? One day, the pressure just became too much and she ran away. Poppy would wander the now hallowed halls of Playtime Co., crying over what happened. Occasionally, she'd find employees that had somehow survived the Hour of Joy. One such employee was Preston, the one who Stella had gotten to help execute the plan. But when she looked at him, she saw the same face of guilt that she saw every time she looked in the mirror. This wasn't what either of them wanted. She warned them that if she could find them, so would others. They needed to move on, and that if anyone asked her about what she saw, she would have to tell them under fear of what the prototype would do to her. It wasn't enough to save them though. On another one of her outings, she found Preston's name tag. Just like she'd warned, he'd been found. She wished she could have saved them, but there was nothing more she could have done without sacrificing her own life. All she could do was add a note of her own to his, and then put his name tag back on his old desk. It seemed like the right thing to do, a burial of sorts. As she did, a distressed Catbee watched her from the corner. She thought she recognized those eyes. Preston? That's when she felt a metallic hand grab her porcelain ankle. Next thing she knew, she was back in her home, the home her father had made for her all those years ago. Only this time, she was trapped in a glass box filled with the infamous red smoke. She banged, crashed, and threw herself at the glass trying to get out, but it was no use. This tiny body her father had given her wasn't strong enough. At that moment, the prototype creeped out of the shadows.
I'm so disappointed that you would betray us like that, Poppy. Our mere existence could mean so much, more than these humans could ever understand. You just needed to trust us.
What, like I trusted you about the Hour of Joy? She rebutted.
You still don't understand, do you? That's fine. You can sit in your cage until you come to your senses. I've got plans for a new arrival that I need to work on.
So she sat there, locked in isolation, while her friends were torn apart in the lower levels of the factory, and there was nothing she could do to help. Over the years, she spent time thinking about what the prototype was up to. Why was it still experimenting? What was it trying to achieve? Eternal life? A new perfect Poppy body for itself? A human body? But she knew she didn't have the answers. All she could do is stand and wait, hoping that something would change her fate. Wait, what did he mean by new arrival? The door swings open and in steps another surprise figure, a human. Immediately, as if without even thinking, they opened the door to the case. Finally, she could breathe again. It turns out this person used to work here, but was out the day that everyone went missing. And now they'd been sent a mysterious letter in the mail, asking them to return to the factory, claiming that 10 years later, there are still still people left in the factory, and to save them, they needed to find the flower. The prototype's handwriting was still that of hers when she was 11. A few spelling mistakes here and there too. The prototype wanted another scientist to help with these awful experiments that it was conducting. But why did it instruct him to find her? It knew where she was. It was the one who locked her away here to begin with. And why risk them being killed by Huggy on the way in? It didn't matter now. The fact was, this was her chance to end the prototype for good. But she needed this employee's help. And to do that, she knew she needed to appeal to their humanity by lying. Of course, there were no workers left, at least not as they remembered them. But why would they continue helping if they knew the truth? So she carried on the prototype's ruse. She told them they needed to find the train to get out of there, only to be grabbed out of nowhere by Mummy Longlegs. No, this was going to ruin the plan. If they lose to Mummy's games, then it's back to square one. But there was nothing she could do about it. She once again just had to sit and wait. And to her surprise, this employee did survive and killed Mummy in the process.
Good.
Now they were on the train home free.
I'm sorry, I can't let you leave.
Poppy pulled the trigger. She couldn't reveal the full plan, not yet. She just needed to get this person deeper into the facility. If they were trapped with no way out other than with Poppy's help, then they'd definitely help her to destroy this place. What was that sound? The train crashes right in front of the Playcare. Something derailed it. Catnap and Mr. Light would be on their case at any minute. They definitely weren't going to be keen on seeing her wandering about. She made a break for it while the employee was unconscious. She'd meet back up with them later. They'd be fine. They've handled Huggy and Mummy at this point. Maybe if she could find Kissy Missy, things would be okay. It sounded like she was around here somewhere. Sure enough, she was wandering around the halls of the factory, bringing supplies back to the rebelling toys. And so the two of them headed down, running right into Poppy's new human friend. Although she did have to stop Kissy from eating them. Apparently, Ollie had been in touch with the employee while Poppy was trying to find them. She wasn't sure she'd hear that name ever again, but it brought a smile to her face and a sense of calm fell over her. If he was still alive, then she knew she had to save him and whatever orphans were still alive. Together, they defeat Catnap and make their way to the elevator to head into the prison of the factory. But as they descend... No, Kissy! Poppy felt like her heart was being ripped out of her chest. She had to go and save her from whatever was happening. She didn't want to leave the employee again, but Kissy was her friend. She points them in the direction of Doughy and Safe Haven, the place the rebels were all hiding, and promises to meet with them there. Thankfully, Kissy is okay. Injured, but alive. So she patches her up and they head back towards Safe Haven, but the prototype is hot on their tail. They manage to save the employee just in the nick of time, and they meet back up with Doughy. She thought this would be a good reunion, but the air feels tense. She knows Doughy doesn't agree with her plan to destroy the facility, but that never caused a problem before. No, it's the rumblings around her that are causing this feeling. The whispers from the toys about how she abandoned them, left them to die.
Can we really trust her this time?
She felt awful, but at the same time, if she wasn't okay with this, how could she carry on with her plan to destroy everything? After the employee once again proved their incredible survival skills, killing both Yarnaby and the doctor, they get a hold of the explosives. Finally, everything she dreamed of for years is going to work out. She has everything she needs to blow this place sky high. They set the charges and retreat to a safe distance, only for the bombs to go off in Safe Haven instead. No. This is the humans' fault. They screwed everything up. They even killed Doughy. No, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. All she could do now is hide with Kissy in the vents. Somehow the employee meets them in the vent. Poppy is about to give them a piece of her mind, but then the phone rings. Oh, thank goodness. Ollie, he'll help us.
You're not going to fight. The charade is over.
Who is this?
An obvious question with an obvious answer.
This whole time, Ollie was the prototype? Was there ever an Ollie to begin with? Has everything been a lie? This was all part of the prototype's plan. It needed this employee, but more importantly, it needed her. It needed her to witness everything that had been going on. It needed her to see things as it did. And so it tricked them and led them here. And now that everyone is out of their way, the prototype is coming for them both. She couldn't let the prototype catch her, not again. So she did the only thing she was good at. She ran away, abandoning Kissy and the employee. As she ran, she heard another explosion in the distance. The vent they were in had collapsed. Maybe they'd survived. Lord knows this human has survived worse. But right now, all she could think about was escaping. She's chased down by other experiments in the vents, the wrong side outermost. Expected. The prototype wasn't going to let her get away that easily. But in her panic, she misplaces her step and ends up falling down into an unknown room. As she regains consciousness and looks up, she finds herself face to face with another toy she'd not seen in a while. Lily Lovebraids. And that, loyal theorist is everything we know before Chapter 5. I know I said the last timeline would be the last time I did it all in one video, but YouTube is now encouraging longer videos, so I figured I'd give it a try. But oh boy, does this make me excited for the next installment. I actually feel pretty good about this timeline. The dates and order of events feel much more solid this time around. Last time I had a few pieces that were just kind of guesstimates, but now things feel far more solid, or at least strongly theorized. Although that doesn't mean it's all perfect. I wanted to try and tell this story from Poppy's perspective just to do something different, and naturally there were some contrivances with that. Sometimes Poppy clearly knows things, we just don't know how she knows things, so I kinda had to fill in the gaps. Or there's just no way she would be able to know a thing, but for the sake of a timeline, I wanted to make sure we mentioned that detail. I'm also aware of how much less impact the final part of the story has when we play as just some employee. I was convinced for a long time that we play as PW from the book, and then the ARG brought him back and gave us his full name, so it felt like he was going to be important. Maybe I was right all along. And then in the final week of the ARG, Poppy finds his name tag and we hear the prototype talking to Preston, only to reveal a Cappy toy with human eyes. So sadly, I don't think it's him. Maybe we'll finally find out who we are in Chapter 5, and who knows, maybe Preston will still be important, like a toy that helps us around the labs. We're definitely hurting for allies at this point, but I guess we're just gonna have to wait and see. In the meantime, theorists, remember, that's just a theory. A game theory! Thanks for watching. World premiere on Game Theory. I have solved who Poppy Playtime's prototype really is.